that okay. Attack on Titan began publishing on September 9th, 2009 by Kodansha, written and illustrated by Hajime Isayama, and this is my critique of its first chapter to you 2,000 years from now. I immediately have to start gushing as the narration lets us know the terrible position that mankind is in, which it will also illustrate the next couple of pages over. Attention is pressed on 3 children throughout the page as they are shocked to see something peeking over a large wall. Flipping the page over, we get a clearer view of what appears to be a humanoid face, getting a sense of scale for the thing in one panel with what seems to be like smoke or steam billowing from it. The birdcage analogy is very apt as we see these walls contain the entirety of the town. We will be given more context for this later on. However, I wanted to note the horror aspect of this. What terrifies a person is up to the individual, although I believe Isayama has attempted to frame it to be as relatable as he could. Firstly, putting the focus on children. Now, even an adult would be helpless facing down something like this. Nonetheless, I would argue utilizing these kids accentuates the powerlessness that's meant to project on the reader. Secondly, the portrayal of this giant. The threat that it represents is unambiguous. The intentions of Isayama are as naked as this behemoth. This is a skinless, gargantuan, man-like creature that could easily crush several houses and people by just moving 1 foot forward. It's comparable to facing down a natural disaster. There's no reasoning or combating your way out of this. If you have any questions on what the implications of this thing or this event are, you're gonna have to wait. We now follow uniformed soldiers riding horseback. They reach their target. It appears to be similar to the last giant, but not nearly as tall since it's dwarfed by large trees. The dialogue implies experience and some sort of comprehension of these monsters. We get a few glimpses of their gear, a grappling hook, and a detachable sword, but before we can witness them in action, the chapter then cuts to another scene, perhaps a running theme. We are back with the 2 kids from the first page. The girl seems to be saying goodbye, and after a small black panel, she is then waking him up. She gives us the boy's name, Aaron. Not sure what's trying to be achieved here. My initial thoughts were that one or both of the incidents earlier were actually a dream, but as we'll see, that will not be the case, so we'll just need to move on. Aaron states the young girl's name, Mikasa. He makes a comment about the length of her hair. Now, this is an issue with how that earlier panel was drawn, because I certainly can't tell the difference. Their conversation draws further attention to Aaron's dream, so in a way, Isayama is trying to tell us to keep that moment in mind, as it will have consequences. As Aaron gets up, he is noticeably crying. Even he is confused at this, so clearly what he envisioned was emotionally taxing. Another black panel appears, but now with the text 845, which doesn't mean much to us now. We get a closer shot for scale of the wall compared to the town. We see the similar shield-style emblem on the wall that was on the soldiers' cloaks. The top of the wall has mounted cannons, giving us an idea of the kind of technology available in this world. Again, the dialogue focusing on the crying, prompting the reader to keep that dream scene in mind. Though if I'm being honest, I think this incident may be too vague to devote to memory. Too many variations of events could happen as long as it ends with Mikasa saying goodbye and Aaron crying. There's just too much room for interpretation. Isayama hasn't placed enough restrictions on himself. Whether intentional or not, he's designed it in such a way that he doesn't need to commit to what the scene means until he's ready to explore it further. Aaron's father is implied to have medical experience. He doesn't want his dad to find out about him tearing up, clearly feeling embarrassed by the situation, which is exploited by a man introduced as Hannes. Again, we notice similar sigils on the uniforms and the gear they are equipped with, which may have us recall the soldiers from the forest, so that lets us know that incident is in a completely unrelated tangent as when initially read. These men are depicted as lazy drunks. Their duty is to patrol the gate, but they are seen huddled up together, already inebriated as detailed by their flush faces. Aaron takes issue with their lackadaisical behavior and berates them, arguing that this makes them ill-prepared for an invasion. An unnamed soldier justifies that in 100 years there hasn't been a breach. Hannes concedes that Eren may have a point, but elaborates that after observing the Titans, he doesn't believe they represent much of a threat, with the 50-meter wall between them. Eren interprets this as a cover for the guards' incompetence. Hannes doesn't take issue with being perceived as a slacker, since this makes the public feel at ease. The unnamed soldier agrees and adds that he sees no purpose in exploring beyond the walls, that all society needs is food and shelter. Eren compares this as living as a caged animal, reinforcing that birdcage metaphor from the beginning. After the kids leave, one of the men make a dismissive remark. Hannes speculates that Eren may join the Survey Corps. So throughout the conversation, we get some matters clarified. Eren's father is indeed a doctor. We can infer based on the comments about exploring outside the wall that the company from earlier is the Survey Corps. This conversation establishes the mindsets of being in such a bizarre situation. The manga delves into the philosophical. There are those who believe that survival is enough to have a fulfilling life, like the men at the garrison. Eren is meant to represent those who believe freedom should not be neglected, and it can be speculated that the Survey Corps feel the same way. At this point, the writing seems to be siding with Eren based on the portrayals of both groups, but perhaps this is too definitive at this point, and Isayama just wants to pull the rug from underneath us. Regardless, Mikasa immediately confirms Hannes' suspicions. Their quarrel is interrupted by a bell ringing, signaling the return of the Survey Corps. Eren hasn't been swayed by Hannes in the least, as he refers to them as heroes. Eren makes his way to see them, and their return has a very solemn atmosphere with all the grimacing faces. We notice plenty of them are injured or dead. Worse yet, it's commented that less than a fifth of them have returned. A woman in the crowd approaches one of the soldiers we've been introduced to earlier. She is begging on her knees, asking for her son. He gives her the only thing remaining of him, one of his hands. In what I believe is an attempt at reconciliation, she asks if at least he had helped their cause. The man makes a weak attempt to lie and spare her feelings, ultimately having a breakdown in front of everyone, clearly unable to bear the guilt of sending these men to their death. One man in the crowd begins to mock the soldiers. In retaliation, Eren throws something at the back of his head and gets dragged off by Mikasa. Relating this to Hannes, while he and his colleagues spend their day being lethargic drunks, we can recognize this as a decision to not want to roll the dice with your life, become dejected from your journey, and be ridiculed by your people. This dichotomy becomes more reasonable based on the consequences. Mikasa attempts to leverage the incident against Eren's decision to join the Survey Corps. Eren takes pause before shifting the conversation to picking up their things. Witnessing this event has at least shaken his conviction, as he doesn't want to give a definitive answer. We are introduced to Eren's parents. Almost immediately, Mikasa reveals to them that he wants to join the Survey Corps. It's undeniable that Mikasa cares deeply for his well-being, even if it means breaking a promise. Eren's mother reacts furiously to this revelation, reminding Eren of what happens to the people who go beyond the wall. His father's expressions make him appear indifferent, much more calm and less biased than his wife. He asks Eren why he would want to go beyond the wall. Eren plainly states that he does not wish to remain oblivious to the rest of the world, and that if humanity were to stop investigating beyond the wall, all the deaths up until now were pointless. Now, I'm not ready to make a conclusive judgment on the writing of his motivation at the moment. These aren't preposterous justifications for a person's point of view. If this were coming from a young adult or older, I could speculate on how, after years of feeling trapped behind the wall, they've been pushed to their breaking point. However, this is coming from a child, and yet he has such a strong vindication and acts out with aggression. I would want to see what influenced him, whether it be from individuals or events. Why would this be important? The inhabitants have an overwhelming negative view of the Survey Corps, so there are social pressures working against him. The near eradication of the band of soldiers is not an isolated incident, as it's referred to as another massacre. Eren has to also work against his own sense of self-preservation. Now, if we are given an explanation on how he arrived at this altruistic outlook, then this helps the readers understanding how Eren overcomes these pressures. It would also increase our desire to see him accomplish his goals. The reasons so far seem rather impersonal and seem like the type of thing a child would parrot from an adult, propaganda, or a political rally. What I'm speaking about is something much more personal. I want to make a comparison to another character from a different manga. However, I also want to preface that I only mean to compare the character motives, and not any other character or story elements, or the overall quality of both series. Naruto Uzumaki is the protagonist of the Naruto manga. Throughout the first chapter, we see him commit delinquent acts like vandalism and pulling tricks on his teacher. He admits that he wants to become the leader of his village and makes it clear that it's for fame and respect. Even if some may think these are shallow goals, at the least they are understandable for a child. But a far more personal motive is revealed. Most of the town reviles him and actively avoids him for reasons he does not know at the time and for circumstances he could not control. Thus his goals and actions act as cries for attention. Now, you wouldn't have to be ostracized from your community to understand loneliness and the desire for acceptance among your peers. It's this personal element that I'm speaking of that I believe is absent from Eren for the time being. The only thing that may contribute to Eren's attitude is that his father doesn't really push back on his beliefs, which I still would say is not the same as praise or guiding him towards a specific direction. His father promises to show him something in the basement, then literally dangles keys in front of our faces, which seems to light up Eren's face. Now, there is a lot more to work with to stimulate a first-time reader's imagination in comparison to the dream. Attention is drawn to the fact that he's a doctor, despite his expertise never being required within the chapter. On top of that, he leaves town before it's over, so it's not relevant in the near future. So, is the secret relevant to his profession? At the very least, we know it has something to do with the outside world because he only brought up the basement secret as a consequence of Eren's curiosity of the world beyond the walls. Or Isayama's a huge troll. Eren's mother makes it clear she has no intentions of allowing him to join the Survey Corps. This only causes him to lash out at her and walk away. The mother pleads to Mikasa to help Eren. We finally get reintroduced to the last member of the trio. He is getting bullied as he refuses to respond with violence, instead choosing to insult his attacker, claiming that he can only respond with his fists because he cannot compete with him intellectually. Like Eren, I can't help mulling over what makes him so strong in his convictions. Like, how many punches to the face does he need to take? How much more would he need to bleed before he's willing to betray this pacifist act? Before we can find out, Eren intervenes. It seems that a brawl might erupt, but they notice Mikasa, turn tail, and run. She appears to have a formidable reputation. The boy's name is Armin. We learn he shares Eren's dream of going beyond the wall. Their government and king are against any interest in the outside world. Eren assumes it's out of cowardice, but Armin speculates there might be other motives. While the boys handle conflict resolution as polar opposites, we can see them share their frustration on a society that shuns their ideas. Mikasa is the odd one out as she disagrees. At this point, out of the three, her perspective makes the most sense with the least amount of explanation. She doesn't want her friend to die, so she attempts to reason with him. When he ignores her, she attempts to get his parents involved and risks his derision. Mikasa doesn't seem to oppose the idea of exploring outside the wall, only chiming in on the conversation when Eren suggests he should be allowed to do whatever he wants with his life. Armin rationalizes that the world beyond the walls is absolutely dangerous, but says a century of peace isn't guaranteed to last. He even mentions they could break through the wall today. That moment, a large tremor is felt. The kids run to the streets to investigate. Armin is the first to see the source of the vibration and stares off in horror. The others join him as the opening scene is recreated. A close-up is given of the Titan's gruesome face. The line about the bird cage is also reiterated. The gargantuan Titan blasts a hole through the wall, and the smaller grunts gather around it. We are left on this gripping cliffhanger as the worst-case scenario has been realized. The foreshadowing is already laid on thick, considering all these discussions are happening on the same day, but having Armin state that the Titans might break through the wall moments before they do seems a bit excessive. I would even say may come across as unintentionally comedic. Hope this horrible thing doesn't happen right now. I gave praise to the opening, though now I have to ponder whether it made sense to structure the chapter this way. This may be a bit cynical on my part, but it could be a case that the writer believed the reader wouldn't even finish the first 50 pages without enticing them. This could have been used to have the reader change their perception of this event after following a few of the citizens around. However, our understanding of this particular incident hasn't been changed. From our perspective, obviously a 50-meter tall giant walking into our neighborhoods is a tad bit unlikely. But even the townspeople are just as in the dark. So if the first 3 pages were cut out, I think it'd still be just as shocking. In fact, I think it might have been more effective since the writing gets us conditioned to believe that these things are only a danger outside of the wall, and they're nowhere near 50 meters tall. So the threat has an escalation rate. A more charitable interpretation is that it is simply meant to color the rest of the chapter with a dreadful atmosphere. I may have appeared a bit harsh on the characters, particularly Eren and Armin, but they are our lead characters. They have a lot of confidence in their beliefs and are firmly emotionally attached to them, so I don't think it's asking too much for how they got there. I certainly wouldn't hold these standards for minor characters like Hannes and his crew, although it certainly excels at letting us know what's going on in the minds of the general population. I admire the efforts to focus on the many perspectives we get to see in this world. The garrison, survey corps, townspeople, Eren's friends and family, even the government is lightly touched on. There were instances where the chapter could have been distracted by action, but always cuts before any person can collide with a Titan. In place of it, we can focus on the citizens within the walls. It's definitely a realized world. You have an idea of what these people's circumstances are, how they feel about it, and what they value most. As mentioned, the specifics could be worked on. Overall, I thought it was a solid start to the series. It gets the reader engaged by not only telling them about this world, but prompts the reader to ask a lot of questions. How did humanity end up like this? Is there anything left of the outside world? What does Eren's dream mean? What is his father hiding in the basement? What other reasons would the government be against exploration of the outside world? What'll happen after the wall collapses? What does the title of this chapter mean? But that's all for now, and thanks for watching.